Jane was standing in someone else's kitchen at 6 in the morning, and the only thing she could think about was that she had not seen it coming. Not once. James came home on a Thursday night and did not take off his jacket. He stood by the living room door with both hands in his pockets and told her he needed to talk. She turned off the stove and waited. 18 months ago he had borrowed a large amount of money from a woman named Celeste. He told Jane at the time it was a private loan from a business contact. He did not tell her the amount. He did not tell her the name. He told her it was handled. The deal he put the money into collapsed 8 months later. He lost everything. He had been making small payments to Celeste for 10 months, but the payments were not enough and the interest had grown, and now Celeste had called in the full debt. James could not pay. The house had a mortgage he was behind on. The savings account had less than $2,000 in it. He had looked for another way out and could not find one. So he had found a different way. Celeste needed a full-time cook and housekeeper. James had told her that Jane was exceptional in the kitchen. That she had run a food stall for 6 years before they married. That she could manage a house better than anyone he knew. Celeste had agreed to cancel the debt completely. In exchange for Jane. Jane sat down on the couch. She asked him to say it again. He said it again. Every word exactly the same. She sat with it for a long time. The room was quiet. James did not move from the door. She asked if there was any other way out. He was quiet long enough that the quiet became its own answer. She asked one more thing. She asked if he wanted her to fight it. He looked at the floor. She went to the bedroom and packed one bag. Clothes. Her good knife wrapped in cloth. A notebook full of recipes she had been writing in since she was 15 years old. She did not take long. There was not much worth taking. James was still by the door when she came out. He did not offer to carry the bag. He did not move. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face in 11 years of marriage. It was not guilt. It was something smaller than guilt and harder to forgive. She walked past him and out the front door. Celeste answered the door herself when Jane arrived. Composed and sharp at 11 at night in a way that made Jane feel the full distance between where she was standing and where she used to be. Celeste looked her over slowly. Then she stepped back and let her in. She showed her the small room at the back of the house. A single bed. A window facing the side fence. She walked her through the kitchen and explained the schedule and what was expected each day. Her voice was even and businesslike the entire time. Like she was orienting a new appliance rather than talking to a person. At the door of the kitchen she stopped and turned back once. She said, "I take my coffee at 7. Do not be late and do not make it weak." Then she walked away down the hall and the sound of her heels faded and Jane was alone. She stood in the middle of that kitchen for a long time without moving. Her husband had put a number on 11 years of marriage and the number had not even been enough to clear a debt. She was not going to cry about it. Not here. Not in this kitchen. She picked up her bag and went to her room and sat on the edge of the bed. And she opened the notebook. Not to read it. Not to feel anything about it. She opened it to the first clean page she could find and she picked up a pen and she started writing. If James had known what she was writing that night he would have driven to that house and begged her to come home. But James did not know. And that was the beginning of everything. Celeste did not raise her voice at Jane. Not once. That was the thing Jane had not expected. She had prepared herself for anger. For coldness. For the kind of open cruelty that would at least give her something clear to push against. What Celeste gave her instead was much harder to deal with. Celeste simply acted as though Jane was not entirely there. The first morning Jane was up at 5:30. The coffee was ready at 6:55. Hot, strong, the right cup on the right side of the tray. She set it on the counter and waited. Celeste walked in at 7, picked up the cup, drank it standing by the window, put it down, and walked out without a word. Not a good morning. Not a thank you. Not even a look in Jane's direction. Jane washed the cup and started on breakfast. That was how every morning went. The schedule Celeste gave Jane left no gaps. Breakfast by 7. House cleaned by 10. Lunch by 12:30. Grocery orders by 2. Dinner on the table by 7. Kitchen closed by 9. 6 days a week. Jane worked through all of it without complaint. She cooked the way she had always cooked. Carefully. Precisely. From memory and instinct built over 20 years of feeding people. The food was better than good. The kitchen smelled different when Jane was in it. Celeste ate every meal Jane prepared and said nothing about any of it. Not to praise it. Not to criticize it. She ate and moved on as though the meal had simply appeared. Celeste hosted dinners regularly. Business partners, investors, clients, contacts. Not social occasions dressed as business events. Business events dressed as social occasions. Deals over appetizers. Agreements over dessert. Jane cooked everything. Every course. Every dish. She worked alone from 3 in the afternoon until the last plate went out. The food was noticed every time. Guests asked Celeste about the chef. One woman said the lamb was the best thing she had tasted in a long time. Celeste smiled and said she had found someone with a real talent. She accepted the compliments and redirected the conversation. She never said Jane's name. Not once across 6 dinner gatherings did she acknowledge to a single guest that there was a specific person in her kitchen responsible for what they were eating. One evening a guest asked directly to meet the cook. He was a food writer and had been eating professionally for 20 years. He wanted to put a name to what he had just experienced. Celeste told him the cook was not available. Jane was standing 12 feet away on the other side of the kitchen door. She heard every word. She stood still until the conversation moved on. Then she went back to cleaning the station and did not stop moving until the kitchen was done. That night she called Lisa. Lisa was her younger sister by 4 years. She lived 3 hours away and called every week without fail. The only person from Jane's previous life who had stayed in contact since the Thursday night Jane walked out with one bag. Jane told Lisa what had happened at the dinner. The food writer. The request. The door. Celeste's answer. Lisa was quiet for a moment. Then she said she was coming. Jane told her not to. She said she was working on something and needed her head clear. Lisa asked what she was working on. Jane said she did not know how to explain it yet. But she would when it was clearer. After the call, Jane sat for a while without moving. The house was quiet. Celeste had gone to bed. The kitchen was clean and dark down the hall. She reached under the mattress and pulled out the notebook. Every dish she cooked written down in full. Quantities exact. Temperature specific. Notes on timing and what she would change next time. But also something else. She was writing down what she observed each day. How Celeste handled a difficult supplier call without raising her voice. How she structured a room so everyone came to her. How she never explained herself more than once. Jane did not admire Celeste. She had no interest in becoming Celeste. But Celeste knew things Jane did not know, and Jane was not going to waste the proximity. She put the notebook back and turned off the light. In the dark she thought about James. About the fact that he had not called. Not once. Not a single word since that Thursday night. She had been his wife for 11 years and he had handed her to another woman to cancel a debt and then gone completely silent. She thought about that for a long time. Then she turned over and closed her eyes. One day she was going to be the one deciding what time the coffee was made. And on that day nobody was going to hand her anything. She was going to build it herself. It was on a Sunday in the 6th week that James finally called. Jane was in her room with the notebook open on her lap when the phone rang. She looked at his name on the screen for a long time before she answered. He asked how she was. She said fine. He said he was glad to hear it. He said things had been complicated on his end, but he was working through it. She asked if he missed her. There was a pause. 3 or 4 seconds at most. But she had been married to this man for 11 years and she knew every variation of his silence. He said things were complicated. She said she had heard that already. He said he appreciated how she was handling it. She looked at the wall of her small room. The single bed. The window facing the fence. The notebook on her lap full of everything she was quietly building inside a house she had been delivered to like a payment. She told him she had to go and hung up. She called Lisa immediately. Before Lisa could speak, Jane told her everything. The complicated. The loose ends. The appreciation. Lisa was silent for a moment. Then she said, "He did not call to find out how you are. He called to find out if you are angry. Because an angry Jane is a problem for James. A quiet Jane is something he can manage. He is not checking on you. He is checking on his own comfort." Jane wrote that in the back of the notebook that night and did not look at it again for a long time because it was too accurate to sit with comfortably. She thought about the food stall she had closed when she married James. He had told her she did not need it anymore. That he would take care of everything. She had believed him. She had shut the stall within 3 months of the wedding. Walked away from 6 years of something she had built herself because a man she trusted told her she did not need it. She opened the notebook to a clean page and wrote one line at the top. It said, "Do not let anyone tell you what you do not need." She underlined it once. She was not angry at James. Anger would have been easier to carry. What she felt was something colder and more useful than anger. She felt clear. She was going to get out of this house. Not by waiting for James to come back. Not by asking Celeste for anything. She was going to cook her way out. She had 10 notebooks. 20 years of recipes refined to the point where she could produce food that made a professional food writer stop mid-conversation and ask to meet the person responsible. She had that. And somewhere in the city there had to be someone who would recognize what that was worth. She just had to find them before Celeste figured out what was sitting in her kitchen. Celeste announced the annual gathering on a Monday morning in October. She set a single sheet of paper on the kitchen counter beside the sink. A guest list. 43 names. Dietary notes beneath them. At the bottom in Celeste's precise handwriting were 3 words. 2 days. 60 portions. The gathering was in 11 days. The food needed to be impressive but controlled. The budget was handled. Jane could order whatever she needed through the usual supplier account. Then Celeste picked up her coffee and walked out of the kitchen. Jane stood at the counter with the sheet of paper in her hand. 60 portions. 43 guests with varying needs. An event Celeste used every year to close deals and cement relationships with the people who mattered most to her business. 11 days. Alone. She put the paper down and picked up the notebook and started planning immediately. She spent 3 days on the menu. Not cooking. Thinking. Writing. Crossing out. Starting again. She thought about the kind of people who would be sitting at that table. People who ate well regularly. People who would not be impressed by effort alone. They would only be moved by something they had not tasted before. She built the menu around that. She went back through the earlier notebooks. Dishes her mother had made that Jane had refined and then set aside because there was no right occasion for them. She took those dishes apart on paper and rebuilt them. Kept the core of what made them work and stripped away everything that did not serve that. By day, for she had a menu she believed in completely. The prep work in the days that followed was brutal. For hours of sleep a night. Cooking at a scale she had not managed in years. Doing it alone while still running the full household schedule because Celeste did not reduce her daily duties to accommodate the gathering workload. She did not complain. There was no one to complain to and no version of complaining that would change anything. She just kept moving. The day before the gathering, Celeste came into the kitchen and looked at the organized trays and covered dishes and labeled containers along every counter and shelf. She looked at it all for a moment. Then she said, "Make sure the kitchen is not visible from the main room when the guests arrive. Close both doors." She left. Jane stood at the stove and kept working. She had not expected a thank you. She had stopped expecting anything from Celeste weeks ago. But there was something particular about being told to make herself invisible the day before she was going to spend 12 hours feeding 60 people that sat in her chest in a way she could not immediately set down. She set it down anyway. There was too much left to do. The evening of the gathering, the house filled up quickly. Jane was in the kitchen with both doors closed. She cooked continuously from 3 in the afternoon. The food went out in waves. Empty plates came back every time. Through the wall she could hear the gathering. Conversation rising and falling. Laughter in short bursts. The particular sound of a room full of people who are comfortable and well fed and open to each other in the way that only happens when the food has done its job. She knew the food was landing. She could feel it through the walls. 2 hours into the evening she moved to the door and listened. A woman's voice said the food was extraordinary. That she could not identify what was in the sauce on the second course and that the not knowing was the best part. A man's voice asked who had catered the event. Celeste said she had found someone exceptional. The man asked for a name. Celeste said she would pass along the compliment. Jane stepped back from the door. She finished the final course. Did not move from the station until every plate had gone out and come back clean. Then she cleaned the kitchen herself. Every surface. Every dish. Reset everything. She sat on the small step stool in the corner and for the first time in 6 days she was completely still. She was tired of being invisible. Tired of producing something that moved people and then disappearing so completely that her name could not be given to a guest who asked directly. She pulled out the notebook and wrote the full menu from the evening. Every dish. Every adjustment. What had worked. What she would sharpen next time. Then she wrote one more thing at the bottom of the page. She wrote, "This is the last time I cook for someone else's reputation." She turned off the kitchen light. She did not know that on the other side of the door a man named Douglas had arrived late to the gathering. That he had made his way through the main room and found himself standing in the hallway unable to move because of a smell coming from behind the closed kitchen door. She did not know he was standing there. But the door between them was about to open. And when it did, everything was going to change. Douglas Webb did not want to be at the gathering. He had accepted Celeste's invitation as a favor to a mutual contact. He arrived 40 minutes late, shook hands with Celeste, and moved into the main room. He spoke to a few people. He ate a small plate of something passed on a tray and stopped chewing after the first bite. He finished what was on the plate slowly. Then he took another from the next tray that came past. He had been eating seriously for most of his adult life. Not as a hobby. As a function of the business he had built across 30 years in the hospitality industry. He had eaten in serious kitchens on 4 continents. He had funded for restaurant groups and held stakes in 11 hospitality businesses. He knew food the way a builder knows a wall. Not just the surface. What was holding it up? What was on that tray was not catered food. He set his drink down and moved toward the hallway. The smell reached him before he found the door. Specific and layered. It stopped him completely in the middle of the hallway. He pushed the kitchen door open. Jane looked up from the stove. Both hands moving. A cloth over her left shoulder. The 10th notebook open on the counter with a pen resting across the page. Every surface in the kitchen organized with a precision that told him she had been working this space for hours and knew exactly where everything was. She looked at him the way someone looks at an interruption they do not have time for. He said he was sorry for walking in. He had followed the smell. She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to the stove. He pulled a stool from the corner and sat down. He watched her work. She was not cooking for him. She was cooking because there were plates that needed to go out and she was the person responsible for them. He simply happened to be in the room. He asked about the sauce on the second course. She told him the base, what she had built on top of it, why she had made the specific choices she made, what she had adjusted from the version she made the previous time. He asked how many times she had made it since then. 11 times. Each time a little different. He asked which version she preferred. Tonight's. Not because it was perfect. Because it was the closest she had gotten to what she could see in her head when she thought about what the dish was supposed to be. He looked at the notebook on the counter and asked what it was. She said it was where she kept her work. He asked how long she had been keeping it. Since she was 15. This was the 10th one. He asked where she had trained. She said she had not trained anywhere formally. Her mother's kitchen was where it started and 20 years of cooking for people was where it continued. He asked what her setup was. Whether she had a restaurant. She was quiet long enough that he understood the answer was complicated. She said she was currently working in this house. He looked around the kitchen. Then at her. He did not ask anything else about it. Instead he asked what she would cook if cost and context were completely removed. No budget. No dietary lists. No occasion. Just her and a kitchen. She stopped what she was doing. She turned and looked at him directly for the first time since he had walked in. Then she told him. She talked for 11 minutes without stopping. For dishes in complete detail. Where each one came from. What she was trying to do with each one technically. What the experience of eating it should feel like from the first bite to the last. She talked about food the way someone talks about something they have been thinking about for a very long time with no one to tell it to. He did not interrupt once. He stayed on the stool for another hour. He asked questions and she answered while she cleaned. When the kitchen was done he stood up and said thank you. She nodded and kept wiping the counter. He reached into his jacket and placed a business card face down on the counter beside the notebook. He said good night and walked out. Jane finished cleaning. Hung the cloth. Took off her apron. Then she picked up the card and turned it over. Douglas Webb. A title she read twice. A phone number. She put it in the notebook and closed it. She was up at 5 as usual. She made her tea and sat at the small table by the window. There was something on the counter that had not been there the night before. A single sheet of paper. Folded once. She picked it up and opened it. It was the debt receipt. The original document drawn up the night James made his arrangement with Celeste. The one that had transferred Jane to this house in exchange for clearing what James owed. Across the front in red ink was a single word. Paid. No note. No explanation. No indication of who had left it or when. Jane stood in the kitchen holding the paper for a long time. Then she looked at the notebook on the table. At the business card inside it. She understood. She picked up her phone. It was 5:14 in the morning. She did not care. She dialed the number. Douglas answered on the third ring. His voice was the same as it had been in the kitchen the night before. Unhurried. Like a man who had already been awake for an hour and was not surprised by the call. Jane said her name. Said she was the cook from last night. Said she was sorry for calling this early. He said do not apologize for that. She said she had found the receipt. He said he was aware. She asked why. He said he had been in the hospitality business for 30 years. He said in 30 years he had walked into a kitchen twice and felt what he felt the night before. He said the first time he did not act fast enough and someone else built something worth $300 million. He said he was not going to make that mistake again. Jane sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. He said he wanted to meet. Properly. At his office. Bring the notebooks. All of them. He wanted to understand the full scope of what she had been building before they talked about anything specific. She asked when. He said Monday. She said she would be there. She gave Celeste notice that same morning. Told her she was leaving at the end of the week. Told her she had a meeting Monday with someone who wanted to discuss a project. Celeste put her cup down and asked if it was Douglas Webb. Jane said yes. Something moved across Celeste's face. Not anger exactly. The expression of someone who has just realized they underestimated a variable they thought they had fully controlled. She looked at Jane for a long moment. Then she said, "You will not last 6 months. Without heat. Without cruelty." In the same even tone she used to give Jane the daily schedule. She said the restaurant business destroyed people who were not built for it. That cooking well in someone else's kitchen was a completely different thing from running an operation. That Jane had no formal training and no business experience and no understanding of what she was walking into. Then she picked up her coffee and walked out. Jane stood at the sink and thought about what Celeste had said. She turned every part of it over carefully. Then she went to her room and started packing. She was packed by noon. She cleaned the kitchen one final time. Not because she was required to. Because she had kept that kitchen with a standard she was proud of and she was not going to leave it any other way. She left a short professional note for Celeste on the counter and called Lisa. Lisa answered immediately. Jane told her everything. Lisa said, "Tell me what you need." Lisa arrived 4 hours later. Jane carried both bags out without looking back at the front door and got in the passenger seat. Lisa looked at her. Jane said, "Drive." They stopped at a diner 2 miles from Lisa's apartment. Jane sat down in a booth and ordered from a menu and waited for someone else to bring her food. It was the first time in months that had happened. She put all 10 notebooks on the table between them. She said, "I am going to that meeting Monday and I am going to tell him exactly what I want to build. And if he says yes, I am going to build it. And if he says no, I am going to find someone else who says yes." Lisa said, "And if everyone says no?" Jane said, "Then I build it myself. But I am not going back to cooking in a room with the door closed while someone else takes the credit." Monday came. Douglas asked one question before anything else. He said, "What do you want to build?" Jane opened the top notebook and told him. She talked for 20 minutes. He listened without interrupting. Then he made her an offer. He would provide the capital, handle the legal structure, the lease, the licensing, the staffing framework. He would take 40%. Jane would hold 60% with full creative control over the menu and kitchen. If the restaurant failed within 24 months, he would absorb the loss and Jane would walk away owing him nothing. One condition. Her name on the door. Not a brand. Not a trading name. Jane Mercer. Her actual name. She asked why that specifically. He said because in 30 years the restaurants that lasted were the ones where the person responsible for the food had enough belief in what they were doing to attach their name to it publicly. It was not a vanity condition. It was a commitment condition. Putting your name on something changed how you showed up for it. She thought about it for a moment. Then she said yes to all of it. They shook hands across the table. She walked out of his building and called Lisa from the sidewalk. Lisa picked up before the first ring finished. Jane said, "He said yes." She felt like herself for the first time in longer than she could measure. It lasted 4 days. Then a letter arrived. It came through a law firm representing Celeste. 3 pages of formal language that took Jane 2 reads to fully understand. The claim was simple and calculated. The recipes Jane had developed and refined while working in Celeste's kitchen were produced on Celeste's property, on Celeste's time, using Celeste's equipment and supplies. Under the terms of the domestic work arrangement, Celeste argued those recipes constituted work product and belonged to her. She was claiming the notebooks. Jane sat at Lisa's kitchen table with the letter in her hands and did not speak for a long time. Lisa read it over her shoulder. When she finished, she sat down and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, she watched you cook in her kitchen for months and never once said your name to a single guest. Now she wants to own what you made there. Jane folded the letter and called Douglas. Douglas was quiet while she read him the key sections. When she finished, he said his legal team would respond by end of week. He said Celeste's claim had no basis. 9 of the 10 notebooks had been filled before Jane ever walked through Celeste's door. The 10th contained work developed across a career, not a domestic arrangement. But legal responses took time. And time was the one thing they did not have. The dispute cost 3 weeks. 3 weeks of lawyers and letters and documented evidence of the notebook's history. Jane spent those weeks pulling together everything she could find to prove the timeline. Old notebooks with dates on the covers. Photographs from her food stall years. A supplier receipt from 7 years before she ever heard Celeste's name. Celeste withdrew the claim on a Wednesday morning with no explanation and no apology. Jane sat with the confirmation email for a long time. She did not feel relieved. She felt something harder than relief. She had handed herself over to someone else's house, and that person had taken her labor and her invisibility and her silence and then tried to take the one thing that had kept her moving through all of it. She closed the email. She opened the notebook. She got back to work. The restaurant build was harder than anything she had prepared for. The first lease fell through 6 days before signing. The second location needed a full kitchen refit that ran over budget by 30% and took 11 weeks instead of 7. Jane spent those weeks in meetings with contractors she did not fully trust, asking questions until she understood exactly what she was being told. Douglas assigned her an operations manager named Patricia who had opened restaurants in 4 cities and had no patience for shortcuts. She told Jane on the first day that the food being good was the minimum requirement. The business being run correctly was the thing that would determine whether the food got to keep being served. Jane listened to everything Patricia said and pushed back when she thought Patricia was wrong. Twice Patricia told her she was making a mistake. Twice Jane held her position. Twice Jane was right. After the second time, Patricia said she had worked with a lot of first-time operators and Jane was not like most of them. Jane asked what most of them were like. Patricia said scared of the numbers. Jane said she had been scared of a lot of things in the past year. Numbers were not one of them. She hired 7 people for the opening kitchen team. 2 did not make it past the first month. Not because they were not talented. Because they could not work at the standard she required. Every component of every dish had a specific form it was supposed to take. Not because she was rigid. Because she had spent 20 years understanding why the specific form was correct and she was not willing to serve food that was less than what she knew it could be. The 5 who stayed understood that eventually. One of them, a young woman named B.A. who had been cooking in restaurant kitchens since she was 17, became Jane's most trusted pair of hands. She did not say much. She just cooked at the level Jane needed and that was enough. 3 weeks before the soft opening, a senior member of the kitchen team gave notice and left without explanation. 2 days later, a competing restaurant across the city announced a new menu. 4 of the dishes were close enough to Jane's that it was not coincidence. Jane stood in her kitchen the night she found out and looked at the menu on her phone for a long time. Then she called Lisa. She told Lisa what had happened. She said it plainly without drama. Then she went quiet. Lisa waited. Jane said, "I do not know if I can do this." It was the first time she had said it out loud. The first time in all of it that the weight of everything had come out in one honest sentence. The stolen dishes. The legal fight. The refit. The sleepless weeks. The 3 weeks that Celeste had cost her. The 11 years that James had cost her before that. Lisa did not give a speech. She did not remind Jane how far she had come or tell her to be strong. She said, "Then do not do it tomorrow. Do it tonight. Just tonight." Jane stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then she put the phone down and started rebuilding the menu. She pulled dishes the other restaurant could not replicate because they came from places only she had access to. From the notebooks. From her mother's handwriting on the first 12 pages of the first book. From 20 years of adjustments no one else had made and no one else could make because no one else had lived the 20 years that produced them. She worked until 2 in the morning. There was a night 2 weeks later where she drove to the restaurant after midnight and sat in the car outside with the engine off. The lights were dark inside. The street was quiet. She sat there and looked at the building and thought about everything that had to go right for this to work and everything that could still go wrong. She did not go inside. She just sat there for a while and let the full weight of it land on her without trying to push it away. Then she started the engine and drove home and was up at 5 the next morning. There was also a night she opened the first notebook to her mother's handwriting on the front pages. She had not looked at those pages since the night she packed and left James's house. She sat at the kitchen counter and read what her mother had written. The measurements in her mother's hand. The notes her mother left to herself in the margins. A small drawing of an herb her mother had grown in a pot on the windowsill. Jane sat with it for a long time without moving. Then she closed the notebook and went back to work. She did not cry. There was no version of crying that would have served anything. But she carried those pages with her into every service after that in a way she had not before. The soft opening was for 40 people Douglas had assembled. Industry contacts. A few food writers. Jane cooked everything herself that night. Every plate passed through her hands. The room was quiet in the way that serious rooms get quiet when the food arrives. Not the silence of disappointment. The silence of attention. After the soft opening, Douglas waited at the bar. Jane came out at 11:30 and sat on the stool beside him. He asked how she felt. She said she needed to adjust 3 things before the public opening. He said the food writer in the corner had not looked up from his plate for 2 hours. Jane said that was good, but it was not the point. He said, Wednesday. Fix the 3 things. Open Thursday. She opened Thursday. By Friday the reservation line was full for 7 weeks. Then came the first bad review. A blogger with a mid-sized following posted it on a Saturday morning. He said the food was technically impressive but emotionally cold. That it felt like it was trying to prove something. He gave it 2.5 stars. Jane read it once at 6 in the morning before service. The reservations held. Douglas called and said to ignore it. Patricia said the same. Jane did not ignore it. She read it 3 more times. She went into the kitchen and cooked through the service thinking about the word cold. About whether there was something in the food that was guarded in a way she had not intended. About whether surviving everything she had survived had put a distance between her and the cooking that was showing up on the plate. That evening she changed one dish completely. Not because of the review. Because the review had pointed at something real. The following week a second writer came and wrote the piece that changed everything. He said the food made you want to know the person who made it. He said whoever Jane Mercer was, she had been cooking at this level for a long time and the city had been missing it without knowing. Jane read it once at Lisa's kitchen table. Then she drove to the restaurant and started prep for the lunch service. There was too much work to do. By year 2 the second location was open. By year 3 there were 4 locations across 3 cities and a James Beard nomination. By year 5 Jane Mercer's restaurant group was the most written about independent culinary operation in the country. 6 locations. A cookbook drawn from all 10 notebooks. A wait list at the flagship that ran 3 months. One client from Celeste's annual gatherings called Douglas's office looking for the cook from those dinners. They wanted to hire her for a private event. Douglas's assistant told them Jane had her own restaurant. The client booked a table that week and never attended another of Celeste's gatherings again. Celeste found out through a mutual contact and said nothing to anyone about it. Some losses announce themselves. Others just quietly become permanent. Derek had been James's closest friend since they were young. He was not a bad person. He was the kind of person who stood next to bad decisions and said nothing and then spent years afterwards living with the knowledge that he should have spoken. He had been in the room the night James explained what he had arranged with Celeste. He had said nothing. He had told himself it was not his place. He had been telling himself that for 5 years. He called James on a Tuesday evening in the 4th year and asked if he could come over. James said yes. Derek drove across the city and sat down across from James at the kitchen table and did not accept the offer of a drink. He put his phone on the table between them and opened the food magazine profile. The one with the photograph of Jane, standing in her kitchen with her name on the wall behind her. He slid it across the table. James looked at it. Derek said, "I need you to understand what you are looking at." James said he had seen it already. Derek said, "Then I need you to understand what it means. You had her in your house for 11 years. You watched her cook every day. You ate what she made every night. And you handed her to another woman to cancel a debt. And she took that and built the most talked about restaurant group in this country." James looked at the photograph. Derek said, "I sat in that room when you told Celeste you would send her over. I said nothing. I have thought about that every day since. I am not going to say nothing today." James did not respond. Derek waited. When it became clear James was not going to speak, he picked up his phone and stood up. He said, "You did not lose her because things got hard. You lost her because you looked at everything she was and decided it was something you could spend." He left. James sat at the kitchen table alone for a long time. After a while he picked up his phone and opened a blank message to a number he had not deleted even though he had told himself several times he should. He typed one sentence. He looked at it. He deleted it. He put the phone face down on the table. He did not pick it up again that night. Outside, the city moved the way it always moved. Indifferent. Continuous. Unbothered by one man sitting alone at a kitchen table understanding something 5 years too late. Jane did not know about Derek's visit. She did not know about the message that was typed and deleted. She was in her kitchen at the flagship. It was a Tuesday service. Full room. Every plate landing the way she intended. She did not think about James that night. She had not thought about him in months. On a Wednesday morning in April in the 5th year, Jane was in the back office of the flagship finishing a supplier call when Joe knocked on the open door. Joe had been her driver for 3 years. On time every day. Said only what was necessary. Demonstrated a complete lack of interest in anything that was not his job. Jane valued that more than she could easily articulate. He told her the car was ready. She had a meeting across the city with the architect drawing plans for the 7th location. A space she had found 6 weeks earlier that she believed could become the most important restaurant in the group. She went downstairs through the kitchen. Lunch prep was running. She moved through the way she always moved through it. Not inspecting. Just present. BA was at her station at the far end. She looked up as Jane passed. Jane looked at what BA was working on and nodded once. BA turned back to her work. Joe pulled into the morning traffic. Jane looked at her phone. 3 messages from Patricia. A note from the publisher about a second book inquiry. A text from Lisa, "Dinner Sunday? Bring nothing." She typed back, "I will bring wine." Lisa replied immediately, "I said bring nothing." Jane put the phone in her bag and looked out the window at the city. She had not thought about James in a long time. Months. At some point, thinking about him had simply stopped being something that happened, and she had not noticed the stopping until it had already been a long time since the last time. Joe turned onto a street 3 blocks from the flagship on a route they did not usually take. A temporary diversion 2 streets over. Jane was looking at the architect's preliminary notes when the car slowed. She looked up. A crowd gathering on the sidewalk. A market cart had rolled into the side of a parked car. The cart owner was standing in the middle of the gathering with both hands out trying to explain and manage simultaneously. Several people were talking over him. One was taking photographs on a phone. Joe slowed to navigate around the obstruction. Jane looked out the window. She recognized him before her mind had fully processed what her eyes were seeing. James. Thinner than she remembered. Hairline further back. A jacket she did not recognize, older and too light for the morning air. Holding both sides of the cart and talking to the people around him with the expression of a man trying to minimize something already larger than he can manage. He had not seen the car. The windows were tinted. Joe glanced in the rearview mirror. He said nothing. Jane looked at James on the sidewalk. At the cart. At the goods spilled across the curb. At the crowd getting larger rather than smaller. At the expression on his face, which was the same expression she had seen in the living room on a Thursday night 5 years ago. Something smaller than guilt. Something harder to forgive. She was not angry. She had expected anger if this moment ever came. She had expected heat. It did not arrive with heat. It arrived with a clarity that was almost impersonal. She looked at him the way you look at something you finished understanding a long time ago and have not needed to think about since. She saw a man who had made a decision on a Thursday night that he believed was about clearing a debt. He had looked at 11 years of marriage and 20 years of notebooks and 20 years of feeding people at a level that would eventually put her name on the door of the most celebrated restaurant group in the country. And he had looked at all of that and seen something he could use to cancel a number on a piece of paper. He had never once understood what was standing in his house. She watched him for the full time it took the car to navigate around the obstruction. Then she faced forward. Joe had not spoken. He had not slowed beyond what the traffic required. He was doing his job. Jane said, "Continue to the meeting, Joe." Joe continued. She picked up her phone and went back to the architect's notes. Her hand was completely steady. 2 weeks later, James walked into the flagship restaurant. He did not know she owned it. He had managed to get a reservation through a contact and was using it to impress someone. He sat at a table in the main dining room and ordered from the menu. The host recognized the name on the booking from the reservation system and told Jane quietly before service. Jane was in the kitchen. She stayed in the kitchen. She sent BA to handle the table. She told BA nothing specific. Just that table 4 needed her best attention tonight. BA nodded and went out. Jane stood at her station and cooked through the entire service without going near the dining room once. James ate the food. At the end of the meal, he asked the server who had made it. The server told him the restaurant was Jane Mercer's. That she was the chef and owner and was in the kitchen tonight. James went still. He sat with that for a moment. Then he paid the bill, said nothing further, and left. BA came back into the kitchen after the table cleared. She looked at Jane. Jane looked at the plate she was working on. BA said, "Table 4 is done." Jane said, "Thank you." That was all. After the kitchen closed and the team had gone home, James came back. He stood on the sidewalk outside the flagship alone. The street was quiet. The lights inside were low. He could see through the glass into the dining room and beyond it through the service window into the kitchen. Jane was inside. She was moving through her kitchen the way she had always moved through every kitchen. Calm. Certain. Checking a station here, adjusting something there. The team that remained for closing moved around her the way people move around someone they have learned to follow without being asked. She was not performing. She was not managing. She was just in her kitchen at the end of a service doing what she had always done. James stood on the sidewalk and watched her through the glass. He stood there long enough to understand something he had no words for and no way to undo. She had always been this person. He had just never seen her. He had lived beside this woman for 11 years. He had eaten food she made from those notebooks every night. He had watched her wake before sunrise to work on something he never once asked about. He had looked at all of it and never once understood what he was looking at. He had seen something he could use. That was all he had ever seen. He turned and walked away from the glass. Jane never looked up. She did not know he had been standing there. She finished the last check of the kitchen, turned off the lights one by one, and went home. That Sunday Lisa drove to the first location before meeting Jane for dinner. She stood on the sidewalk outside and looked at the name on the door. Jane Mercer. She had seen photographs. She had read the reviews. She had been there for every step of the build. But standing on the sidewalk looking at her sister's name on the door of a restaurant that people drove across the city to eat at was different from knowing about it. She stood there for a while without calling. Jane came out a few minutes later. She had seen Lisa through the window. They stood on the sidewalk together. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Lisa said, "Mom would have come every week." Jane looked at the door. At her own name on it. She said, "I know." They stood there a little longer. Then they went to dinner. Jane was up at 5 the next morning. She made tea and sat at the kitchen table. The architect's drawings were in her bag by the door. The day had things in it that needed her attention and she was going to give them her full attention. But first this hour. She opened the notebook. Not one of the original 10. A new one she had started in the first month of the 5th year. She had simply run out of space in the 10th and reached for a new one and continued without ceremony. This one did not have her mother's handwriting. It had her own. Settled and clear and entirely her own. She wrote the menu she had been building in her head for the 7th location. For dishes she had not yet committed to paper. She wrote them in full. Every component. Every technique. Every reason why each dish was the way it was and what she was trying to do with it. She wrote until the light changed outside. Then she closed the notebook and got ready for the day. Joe was outside at 7. She got in the car with the drawings and the notebook and her phone and everything she needed to do the work that was in front of her. Joe pulled into the morning traffic. Jane looked out the window at the city. It was the same city it had always been. The same streets. The same buildings. The same traffic moving in the same directions toward the same places. Everything else was different. Not because of James. Not because of Celeste. Not because of what had been done to her on a Thursday night 5 years ago by a man who had looked at his wife and seen something he could use. Because of what she had done on the first night in that small room. She had opened the notebook. She had written a menu. She had not stopped writing since. Joe drove. Jane faced forward. There was a 7th restaurant to build. She got on with the work.